important point ahead of tomorrow's decision on interest rates on their key lending rate from the Bank of Canada. To help us look ahead to that decision, I'm joined now by two chief economists. Jean-Francois Perrault, with Scotiabank is here alongside Jimmy Jean at Desjardins. Hello to both of you. Thank you very much for making the time. Mr. Perrault, I'll start with you. Is your expectation tomorrow that the bank continues to hold the line?
Oh, absolutely. I would be gobsmacked if they decided to cut rates tomorrow. It would be, I think, a very big departure from the guidance that they provided, a very big departure from where the economic data have been pushing revisions over the last several weeks. And I think, if that were to be the case, we would think about revising our forecast for the number of cuts this year very significantly, because it would mean a Bank of Canada that is much more troubled about the economic outlook than the data suggests they should be.
Mr. Jean, let's talk a little bit about the forecast beyond this rate announcement tomorrow and where you see the cuts starting to begin. Is it still around the middle of the year, or are revisions on the horizon for that?
That's right. And I think, when you look at inflation, which is the Bank of Canada's target, proper measures of underlying inflation tell us that the target is pretty much attained at this point. So I would say that even if growth has indeed surprised, it's still below potential, and you're still dealing with a lot of challenges in this economy. So I would argue that the Bank of Canada would have all the evidence it would need to start cutting rates right now. I don't think it's going to do so. I still think it's going to start in June, and tomorrow they're going to tell us that they're actually ready to start having that conversation, and that we're continue to look at the data. But there's enough suggestion, and also looking forward, especially with that announcement on temporary residence, enough suggestion that the economy will remain weak and that inflation is not going to take off. I think the Bank of Canada is in for a total of 5 rate cuts this year.
Mr. Perrault, I'll ask you something similar. But in a different way, what's the biggest risk to cuts beginning in the middle part of this year?
Well, there's a few out there. The first is, and despite how people feel about the economy, we know that the economy is tracking on a much better path now than it was a few weeks ago. You go back to, for instance, the Bank of Canada's last forecast for first quarter economic activity, it was 0.5 percentage point. It looks like first quarter will be around 3 percentage points. So there's strength there that is surprising. But more importantly, when you look, for instance, at things like the budget, which is coming next week, we've had the provincial budgets roll out. We know that the fiscal side of the equation is still operating at pretty rapid pace. 25 billion or so in spending from the provinces over the next year, in addition to what had already been promised in the last budgets. That's about a percentage point of GDP. So in addition to kind of growth that's a little bit stronger than we'd expected, you layer in things like, despite, the premiers wanting rates to be cut, they're kind of acting as their own worst enemy in this kind of current environment, where you've got to revise forecasts up to take account of that. And we know the Bank of Canada cares about that deeply because he's talked about it. The governor's talked about this. We have oil prices that are about $20 higher than they were a few weeks ago. That's good for the Canadian economy, hurts households, but good for the Canadian economy. So those things suggest to us that the rates are going to come down this year, almost certainly, but, later rather than sooner. And our view is September. It might be July, it might be September. We're thinking more September because of this combination of factors.
Mr. Jean, I wanted to dig a little deeper into something Mr. Perrault mentioned around government spending and the fiscal side of the equation. He's right that Mr. Macklem, the governor of the Bank of Canada, has referenced, not wanting to work against both fiscal policy at the provincial but also the federal level. We're exactly a week out from the federal budget. We already know a large portion of what's going to be in it, and the new spending equates to about $18 billion. We're not sure of the exact time frame for that spending, but so far we're at $18 billion, and we expect more announcements. In your view, is that level of spending inflationary, or is it, investments on the supply side that won't add to inflation as the government frames it?
And that's really the big problem with most of the spending that's been announced. I don't think it really qualifies as the type of spending that will truly unlock the business investment in particular and generate strong productivity, which when you think about it is the foundation for pretty much everything else. All the social agenda, all the climate change agenda relies on the ability to generate sufficient wealth. And everything I've seen announced at most addresses that very obliquely. I think they're in a position, politically speaking, where they need to they feel the pressure to make those announcements. They have tried to counter that with the spending review. They announced they were supposed to identify $15 billion worth of savings. All we know a year from that announcement is that they only were able to identify $9 billion. And in the meantime, it's been that constant drumroll of announcements that have dwarfed even that $15 billion they were supposed to identify. So what this shows us is that this is those spending reviews are easier said than done, especially at this stage of the political cycle. They worked on the Chrétien government or the Harper government because they were done at early in the mandates. Now they're done in a late mandate type of environment. It's so much harder. So it's an exercise that starts with a big deficit of credibility. And for public finances, I would say it's something that's worrying. I mean, we're worried about public finances everywhere. Canada has a good starting point, but the trajectory and really the ability to respect those fiscal anchors, I would say, is heavily compromised.
Mr. Perreault, just last word to you. I just have a few seconds. On those fiscal anchors, it would appear if this spending is accounted for, there would need to be additional revenue levers implemented through the budget. Is that your anticipation?
Yeah, it's our anticipation. And in fact, there's kind of been some signaling to that effect, right? There were rumors for a while that there would be a special tax on corporations. Now it seems like it might be kind of a tax on high income earners or a wealth tax or something of that nature. It's clear that with the spending that we've seen and the commitment on the part of government to achieve some fiscal anchors, that at least from our perspective, you need a source of revenue to generate that. You need a source of revenue to kind of equalize those things. Now, whether we're talking about tax increases that kick into gear this year versus later years, I'm not sure. But it seems to me that kind of from a basic math principle, you actually need a little bit of revenue growth to make things work out in the way the government says are going to work out over the next few years.